Hi, welcome back to my kitchen. Welcome back to my channel. So today, do you want to learn how to make the yummiest baked Christmas cookies, the best pie crust for the upcoming holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, really great tortillas for your Taco Tuesday, great potatoes, have great fried items, whether that be chicken, French fries, whatever. You need to use this ingredient, and that will give you the most delicious products that you can imagine. And that is pig fat, aka lard. So this is a big bag of frozen pig fat that I'm going to show you how to render into lard, which is going to be the usable version of this. It's very simple. But first, I wanted to kind of talk about lard in general, because you might hear that and think, oh, that's very unhealthy. I don't want to use that. I don't want to serve that to my family and friends and bring that to social gatherings and, whatever negative things you might be thinking. There has been a big campaign against lard, and I think just now recently some of that information is starting to dispel, and we're starting to actually get more recent good information about lard. So lard was what your great-grandmothers probably all used in their everyday cooking. They likely had a jar of it that they kept on their counter that they, drew from and used in their baking and their cooking and things like this on a daily basis, up until not very long ago. So lard is a traditional fat. And for those of us that are wanting to kind of get back more into eating a more traditional ancestral diet, this is definitely a fat that you want to implement, into your kind of everyday routine or your regular routine. I don't eat lard products every day, but it is a very common food item for me and my family to consume. So what I wanted to first kind of talk about was why lard started to go away. Why do we not have lard anymore? Why is it not common to see it anymore in our kitchen? So I did do some research and wrote out some things to kind of go over with you, so we all have that information, so we're kind of starting from the same place. So lard first began to fall out of favor in the early 1900s as competitors such as Crisco and vegetable oil started to hit the markets. The final blow was in the 1950s when restaurants started turning away from lard because healthcare officials were starting to tell Americans that it was unhealthy. So, of course, when people went out to eat, they didn't want to have that on the menu anymore because they were told that it was unhealthy. So kind of why that happened was, to kind of get further into it, about 100 years ago, Procter & Gamble, they owned cottonseed oil factories, and they produced oil that was used in soap making and for candles or like oil lamps, but then the light bulb was invented, so people did not need to illuminate their homes via candles and those old style oil lanterns anymore. So then they had a problem. They had all this oil and they didn't really have a good product for it anymore. So they began doing some research into what they could do with all this oil that they had. So in 1907, a German chemist invented a product, or he produced hydrogenated cottonseed oil, which resembled lard, and it cooked like lard. So looked like it, cooked like it. Great. We can use the oil to produce this. This ushered in Crisco, which is a vegetable shortening replacement for lard. Once that Crisco, was produced, They really went heavy with their advertisements. The radio was new at that time, so they had radio ads, they had publicated ads, they made cookbooks based on Crisco recipes that they sent out. They sent out samples to schools, to hospitals. So everyone was like, what is this new thing? It was advertised as a cleaner, more practical, easier, safer, healthier product versus lard. No pig is required in the equation. Look at this brand new thing. This is what you should have in your kitchen, and then also around that same time, healthcare officials got on the bandwagon, and they started to agree that lard was unhealthy, and that the saturated fats in lard caused heart disease. So, that combination of all those factors, lard was gone. No more lard. We didn't use lard anymore. We switched to Crisco and other types of vegetable shortenings. So kind of just to talk about what that claim that saturated fats are not good for us. This book, Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, who is involved with the Weston A. Price Foundation. I highly recommend that you get this book. It is a wealth of knowledge. If you're at all interested in traditional ancestral eating, you need to have this book, and you should be going on to the Weston A. Price Foundation's websites. They have a podcast. I don't know if they have a YouTube. I'm assuming they do. But this is a wealth of information, so much great information in here. And they also have recipes and everything. So I'm just gonna look in here. There's a whole section about saturated fats and what they actually do for us. So the demonized saturated fats, which Americans are trying to avoid, are not the cause of our modern diseases. In fact, they play many important roles in the body chemistry. Saturated fatty acids constitute at least 50% of the cell membranes, giving them necessary stiffness and integrity so that they can function properly. They play a vital role in the health of our bones. For calcium to be effectively incorporated into the skeletal structure, at least 50% of the dietary fats should be saturated. They lower LPA, a substance in the blood that indicates proneness to heart disease. They protect the liver from alcohol and other toxins such as Tylenol. They enhance the immune system. They are needed for the proper utilization of essential fatty acids. Elongated omega-3 fatty acids are better retained in the tissues when the diet is rich in saturated fats. Saturated 18-carbon stearic acid and 16-carbon palmitic acid are the preferred foods for the heart, which is why the fat around the heart muscle is highly saturated. The heart draws on this reserve of fat in times of stress. Short and medium chain saturated fatty acids have important antimicrobial properties. They protect us against harmful microorganisms in the digestive tract. The scientific evidence honestly evaluated does not support the assertion that artery clogging saturated fats cause heart disease. Actually, evaluation of the fat in artery clogs reveals that only about 26% is saturated. The rest is unsaturated, of which more than half is polyunsaturated. So that's just some kind of very quick overview of saturated fats and the role that they play in our body. Like I said, this book is a wealth of knowledge. There is a whole large chapter dedicated to fats, different types of fats, different sources of fats, all things related to that in our diet and the role that they play. I don't have time or like the knowledge, honestly, to go over all that in this video, but I do highly recommend that you pick up that book. It is fascinating. And like I said, if you're at all interested in ancestral eating, I would really just pick that up. Or if you're just interested in, regaining your health, if you're, it's a very good thing to just have to reference, to read, to get other sources, other ideas, get you thinking differently about maybe what you've been told in the past. So the other thing I want to mention is the source of your lard does matter. I think you can now even purchase lard in some stores. I would just take a very close look at it, see the source, see how it's treated. All we're gonna do with this fat is render it into a liquid, discard some pieces that aren't gonna fully dissolve and discard those, and then we're gonna put it in some sort of container. It will re-solidify. It solidifies when it's not warm or hot. We're gonna store it. I store mine in the freezer, in the fridge, just as an extra layer of safety, but I believe it's really shelf stable, but I don't feel comfortable leaving it on the shelf. That's just my personal preference. So I believe that store, people, when you buy it from the store, they likely put preservatives and things in it to just ensure shelf stability. That's not really what we're looking for. It's very easy just to prepare it on our own. But like I said, the source of it matters as far as if you're getting your fat from pigs that were raised on conventional feedlots versus pasture raised pigs. So, you know, I'm not a big fan of conventional farming in general. And for pigs, you know, they don't sweat, so they don't have really a good way to release toxin buildup in their bodies, which will accumulate in their meat and in their fat. And when they're being raised in a conventional setting, they're likely being fed GMO feed. They may be being given various drugs for infectious purposes, because it's not a very clean environment, as you can imagine. They're also very stressed, which, you know, that impacts them greatly. So it's not a great source of food, because, you know, you are what you eat, and that goes the same for the animals that we're eating. And how do you feel when you're highly stressed, you're crammed and dirty conditions? It's not going to create a good product for you. So you really want to try to source your fat from pigs that are raised on pasture, which they have done studies on meat and fat from pasture-raised pigs versus conventionally raised pigs. And it does show that pigs raised on pasture have 300% more vitamin E, 75% more selenium, which is a vital antioxidant in their milk, which of course they're then passing on to the piglets, so they're going to be healthier. Pastured pigs also have more vitamins in their lard, and they have higher levels of beneficial fatty acids. So those are just some of the benefits, plus just the humane factor is large for me too. And you can find out more information on all of these things in this book. Definitely recommend it. So I just took these big blocks of fat out of my chest freezer. So I am going to have to chop them up into smaller pieces. The smaller pieces that you cut them into, the quicker it'll render down. So I'm going to kind of just set them out for a little bit to get them slightly softened. I don't want them completely thawed. If you've ever tried to like cut up some meat when it still has a little bit of, it's still slightly frozen, it's much easier to cut it into small pieces than when it's completely thawed. So I'm gonna let it mostly thaw, but still have it be a little frozen so I can cut it up easily. It also, it's fat, so it will get, the softer it gets, you know, it's gonna be squishy and, you know, harder to cut also. So I'm just gonna let this soften a bit, and then I'm gonna get it all chopped up. All that we need to, the only thing we need to put it in is, I'm gonna use it like an enameled Dutch oven type of pan, or you can use like a heavy bottom stainless steel pan. Definitely use a heavy bottomed pan for this, but I'll go over that as we get, you know, kind of further along. So for now, I'm just gonna let this set out. I do have two big pieces. So this piece is 9.5 pounds. And then I have this one, it's a little smaller, 8.63 pounds. So I am gonna be doing a lot of baking, and also we make tortillas very often, and that is the ingredient in my tortillas. So we use quite a bit of it. So yeah, I will come back and just kind of show you how I'm gonna chop it up, and then we will go from there. Okay. So I decided to just do the bigger 9-pound piece because it's actually quite a bit. So I already have my enameled pot filled. It will start to melt down. So as it starts to melt, I'll just continue adding more pieces. But you can see I'm just cutting it into these smallerish chunks. And I'll start this on the stove. And like I said, as it melts down, I'll add more. I did want to show this. So a lot of the pieces are like connected by this membrane. It's almost kind of like if you're familiar with the silver skin, which makes the meat difficult to cut. So, you know, a lot of it is connected by this. It's hard to cut through. You can try to peel it off, but that's also very difficult. So what ends up happening as this starts to melt, the fat part will melt, and what will be left in the pan floating at the top are like, you know, little pieces of this membrane, and that is what will then strain off and discard, because we don't want this in with the finished product. So I just wanted to mention that. The key to making lard that is going to be good for baking and cooking with, because we don't want it to taste porky. Hold on, let me just fix my camera here. Okay, so because we don't want it to taste pork, like I don't want when I have a chocolate chip cookie or a apple pie, blueberry pie, I don't want it to taste, you know, like I'm eating bacon with it as well. I just want to taste the, you know, the baked good. So I want to have a very mild flavored lard. In order to achieve that, you want to cook this down slow and low, very, very low. I'm going to put this on the smallest burner on my stove, and I might eventually even move it off the burner a little so it's not completely on there. We don't want it to be like a hard cook. You want it to be a very mild simmer. It does take several hours, so don't rush it. Just pop it on the stove, very low, stir it occasionally. It's more important to stir it more frequently when it's just first getting started, because obviously the pieces that are on the very bottom of this giant pot are going to start to cook much quicker, and I want to, you know, get that all mixed about. But the more along it gets in the process, the less frequently you have to stir. But it does take quite a while, so don't start this right before you need to leave. I have heard of some people doing it in a crock pot. That's probably fine as long as your crock pot does not get too hot. Some crock pots I think are adjustable, like with the temperature. Mine just has like a low high. So I don't know, it might get too hot in my crock pot. So I prefer to do it on the stove. I feel like I have more control. I can see what's going on better. That's just my preference. You can try it in the crock pot. The way you'll know that you'll have a very mild finished product, well, obviously you can taste it and see, but it should be like pure white. If it's yellowish, then it's not bad, but it's gonna have more of that pronounced pork-like flavor, which would still be good for even in the tortillas, or certainly to fry foods, certainly to roast potatoes, add in some roasted other like carrots, whatever. But it may not be something you want to bake with. My goal is to be able to bake and cook, so I want to make sure I have a really nice mild flavor. So I'm gonna get this started on the stove. We're full. So get this on, like I said, the very lowest setting on my smallest burner. I'm gonna stir it about and add more as it starts to melt down, and I'll kind of just show you along the way, you know, how it's progressing. And I store mine in mason jars, so a wide mouth jar, easier to scoop out. It does have like a soft texture, I guess that's the right word. So it is scoopable. So that's what I prefer to store mine in. You can, some people I know that they bake with it, they get like the silicone molds, almost like a butter mold, and they pour that in there so they have a similar shape to like a stick of butter. I just prefer the mason jar. I find it easier. It's easy to store in the freezer. It's easier to keep in the fridge. That's just my preference. You can keep it in whatever you want. But we'll get more into that as we get there. We're a ways away from doing that right now. So, all right, we'll check back in shortly. So this has been on there for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes or so. And as you can see, it, well, it may be difficult for you to see, but it is, it is starting to melt. I think you can tell it's, you know, getting kind of greasy looking here. There is some fat starting to accumulate on the bottom. You can definitely tell that it's cooked down some from how I haven't added any in yet. I'm gonna add in some more now. But this is what it looks like at this point, maybe 10-15 minutes. And like I said, I have it on a very low heat, and I'm just keeping it stirred up just to make sure that any pieces on the bottom aren't like starting to get really browned or anything like that, because like I say, we want to keep that nice pure white lard that we'll end up with. It won't look white until it solidifies, so don't worry if when you're cooking it, if you're like, this does not look white, it'll look white once it sets up. So I'm gonna add in some more pieces here. Oops. And we'll just kind of keep going, keep cooking it down. Oops. And yeah, that's basically it. I mean, the hardest part of this, or I guess it's not really hard, but the most labor intensive part of this is getting it all cut up. And, you know, I could technically, well, you know, you really can cut it as small as you like. The smaller that you cut it, the quicker it does render down. But that was quite a bit of lard to cut up. So this was as much as I was willing to work at it. But it will still, you know, it's fine. It will go, it will get there. I have nowhere to go. I'm not in a rush, so whenever it's done, really, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, we'll just keep at it, and I'll just continue to kind of check back in and show you what it looks like as we kind of keep progressing along here. All right, as you can see, we're making more progress. We're getting melty. So I just continue to stir this occasionally and just keep an eye on it. Make sure it's, you know, not getting overheated, with it's definitely not at this point because there's so much liquid in this pot. But just keeping it stirred up. Make sure there's no hot spots. It's not scorching at all. And we're just gonna keep melting. It's been about probably an hour at this point. So we're making progress. All right, so this is continuing to cook down. You know, we're definitely getting there. It's been several hours. It's been probably, I don't know, 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours since I started cooking it. Still lots of ways to go here. Basically, when it's done, there'll be, you know, all these chunks, they'll all be melted. So we do have quite a bit to go here. And don't let that discourage you, because you're like, wow, this takes forever. Don't forget that I did like over 9 pounds at once. You obviously don't have to do that much. You know, if you just did half of that or whatever, it would be a much faster process. I like to do it in a big batch so I don't have to do it as often, but you know, that's personal preference, of course. So don't let that discourage you, the length of time. It's really because I did like over 9 pounds all at one time, which is quite a bit. I should have quite a few mason jars to fill. Speaking of mason jars, to prep those, I will just wash them out well, and I will get them heated up in the oven, just because this is going to be extremely hot when I'm ladling it in the jar. So I don't want the jar to crack, so I want to acclimate the jar. So I'll probably keep it in a 250-degree oven for like 10-15 minutes just to get them nice and heated up before I pour this boiling hot fat into the jar. But more on that later. This is just going to keep cooking, and we'll check back in. Okay, so as you can see, we're almost done now. Just have a few bits left. And as these start to kind of dwindle away, I'm going to start straining this. What I find easiest is to take a slotted spoon and take most of the pieces that we're not going to, use and kind of get those out of there. but it does need a little bit more time. We're almost there. We're getting really close. So all these are very small little pieces now. Sometimes what I'll do is if there's like a bigger kind of chunk, I'll just take my spoon and kind of press it to the side of the pan just to kind of extract the fat that's in that little piece. That seems to kind of speed it up a little. But we're almost done. So my next step, like I say, is I'm gonna strain this off. I have my jars in the oven getting, staying warmed up. And, pretty shortly here, I'll be ready to start pouring this liquid into my mason jars. Okay, so now I've pulled this off the stovetop. I have some cheesecloth in the top of my jar and then my funnel over that. I did scoop out a lot with the slotted spoon, like I had said, of the chunkies that were left in here. But I didn't get them all, so that's what the cheesecloth is for. That's gonna get the remainder so that all that goes into my actual jar is liquid. So I'm just gonna ladle this off and into my jar, and you want to be very careful because this is extremely hot. I wouldn't use any plastic, no plastic utensils. It will, it won't be good. It'll start to melt it. So just be very careful. And you can see the fat that's in the jar. It's a very light color. It's not white like I said. It'll turn white once it solidifies. And I do prefer wide mouth jars for this. Unfortunately, I don't have enough wide mouth to do all wide mouth. And that's really just because it's easier to scoop it out with my spoon. That's really the only reason. But apparently I have a shortage of wide mouth. I have many, many, many regular mouth jars, but I don't know what happened to all my wide mouths. And the headspace doesn't really matter on this because we're not canning it. It's not going to really expand at all when it's frozen or refrigerated. So, I would leave just a tiny, a little bit of space up at the top, but you don't need to have any certain amount of headspace. You definitely don't need to leave it down at the freezer line like you would if you were going to freeze like a chicken stock or something like that. So you don't have to worry too much about that. All right, so I'm just gonna continue getting these all filled and then I'll show you what we're left with. All right, so you can see I have 2, 4, 6 pint jars filled with my beautiful liquid here. So what I'm gonna do is these little pieces that I have left over in here, I could still get more fat out of these, but it's getting late. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna leave this in my pot with the cover overnight, and tomorrow I'm gonna kind of do a second round. It should go much faster because there's not much left, and I'm just gonna extract what I can left out of that. And so I'll kind of give you, we'll go over that tomorrow. I'll show you what it actually looks like when they're completely spent, when you just have your waste. And then I can show you what these jars look like in the morning. Right now it's just like a yellowish, it's really hot, I can't even really pick it up. It's a yellowish liquid. It should set up overnight. Well, it definitely will set up overnight as it cools. I'm gonna put some covers on here. Some just regular mason jar covers. And hopefully, as long as I heated it up nice and low and slow, it should be that beautiful white color. I'll show you that in the morning, and then we'll finish this up for round 2. And then we will have 9 pounds of rendered lard. So we are like, good for holiday baking and stuff. So, all right, we'll continue in the morning. Okay, so it is now the next day. I continue to cook this further, like I said last night. This is really what your little bits and pieces should look like now when it's like really done. There's nothing really left more for these little pieces to give. It's just little chunks of like that membrane, and just it's, you know, all the fat has been extruded at this point. So I'm going to just do what I did yesterday, you know, try to get the bulk of this out with the slotted spoon. And then I'll line my jar with the cheesecloth and pour in the liquid into the mason jars. And then that will be done. I will show you what yesterday's looked like now that they're cooled, so you should see what your finished product looks like. Okay, so, oh, sorry about that. So I have 6 jars that I filled with yesterday's batch. I'll probably get another 3 jars out of this, but this is what it should look like when it's all done. Remember when I said it should just be like this pure white product? So that's just what it looks like, just all white. And that's how you know, you're gonna have a really nice, mild tasting lard. So beautiful, yeah, whole bunch of it. So how I store mine is I'll keep my one like working jar in the fridge, and then I store my other jars in the freezer until I'm ready to use them. That's personally what I feel safest doing. I would just do your own research if you feel like you want to try to keep them at room temperature. It just makes me a little nervous because it's not, technically sealed in any way. Sometimes the heat of the lard in the jar will seal it. Like this one is sealed, but it hasn't been processed. That's what I feel safest doing. So that's what I do. So that's really it. So out of that 9 pounds of lard, give or take, I have 2, 4, 6, 7, I'll probably have 9, 9 pint jars of ready to cook with lard. So I do hope that if you have more questions, you can, obviously do your own research. I would highly recommend getting the Nourishing Traditions Cookbook by Sally Fallon Morell. Checking out the Weston A. Price Foundation for even additional, lots more additional information on lard, its health benefits, kind of get those old myths out of your mind, that it's, something to be afraid of. It's definitely not, which is great news because it makes for very tasty cooking and baking. So I do hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope that it, was you learn something from it. And I do hope that you go out and try to procure some pig fat and make your own lard. Sometimes it's something that you can get for very cheap too, especially if you're buying pigs by the half or the whole. They'll just give you the fat most often and not charge you for it. Or if you know someone that does that and they don't want the fat, just say, hey, I'll take it. So that's just another little tip. But if you did enjoy the video, if you could please give it a thumbs up, leave a review, that would be wonderful. If you are enjoying my channel, if you could subscribe, that would be great. Really appreciate it. You can also find me on Instagram at Mrs. White Homemade Life. I also co-host a podcast, Figuring Out Homestead Life. So you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, and we're on Instagram as well. And let me know how everything goes, and happy lard rendering. Bye.